As I'm sure all of you well know, 2017 marked the 100th anniversary of the United States entry into World War I. And we here at DAR headquarters wanted to commemorate that anniversary in as many ways as we could. In my department, because we are responsible for collecting and interpreting DAR history, a World War I commemoration meant creating an exhibit that would highlight DAR members' service to the war effort. At first, I worried that although we knew DAR was heavily involved in World War I volunteer war relief, we didn't know if we had enough visual materials in the archives to create an exhibit. My concerns were greatly unfounded, as it turned out. We found that we have rich stores of information in archives on this topic. Most of the photographs and documents I will share here today are from the DAR collection, and are thanks to DAR members who maintained detailed scrapbooks and correspondence documenting their war relief efforts. To give some additional perspective on the importance of a well-kept repository, and this is part of the archives stacks here at DAR, it's important to remember that history isn't what happened in the past, it's the interpretation of what happened in the past. Therefore, the accuracy of an account of a historical event is directly and completely dependent on the quality of the surviving primary source evidence. And we were pretty lucky in that regard, because as we continued our research and we kept peeling back layers and discovering more connections, we supplemented where needed with photographs and other information from repositories other than DAR. And we ended up completing a project that I really think does at least some justice to these extraordinary women. And all of you are encouraged to drop by and see the exhibit after we're finished here today. It is on this level, just right across the hall from us here. To backtrack just a bit and provide some background, for those of you who may not be, there's an awful lot of DAR people here, but just in case you're not familiar with DAR, the National Society, Daughters of the American Revolution, was founded by a small group of women here in Washington in October 1890 to honor the sacrifices of their patriot ancestors who had either fought in the revolution or had provided some sort of material aid to the cause. Now, as the DAR just recently passed its 127th birthday, DAR members continue their commitment to remember their ancestors by volunteering millions of hours each year in their communities, promoting patriotism, preserving American history, and securing America's future through better education for children. These efforts also include supporting active duty military personnel and assisting veterans programs. This is an image of a postcard of the first of our three buildings, Memorial Continental Hall. The postcard is dated circa 1910, which is the year that the building was completed. On April 6, 1917, the United States declared war on Germany after President Woodrow Wilson and his administration had spent the previous 2 years and more maintaining a neutral stance on the war in Europe. However, in his address to Congress on April 2nd, the president cited Germany's increased aggression toward U.S. interests and cited that as a reason to enter the conflict. During the remaining year and a half until the armistice, the United States committed not only material and financial support to the Allies, but also more than 4.7 million servicemen. More than 116,000 of them were lost in both combat and non-combat deaths, and that includes the devastating 1918 Spanish flu outbreak. With American men mobilized to fight, some American women took advantage of their first opportunity in American history to enlist in the armed services during wartime. Thousands of women joined the Army as nurses, or the Navy or the Marines as yeomen. Approximately 260 DAR members went abroad to perform war service, and an additional 125 DAR members enlisted but were not called up. More than 200 American women served as switchboard operators in France for the U.S. Signal Corps, U.S. Army Signal Corps, where they were known as Hello Girls. Some women also acquired employment in traditionally male jobs to help ease the labor shortage caused by the men going overseas to fight. However, the majority of women's involvement during World War I was accomplished through voluntary organizations that supported the war effort. Keep in mind, this was also the progressive era. Many women were already used to engaging in volunteerism and reform activities that were beginning to get out from under full-time housekeeping duties as the 20th century turned. Thousands of women in the United States formed and or joined organizations such as the Navy League, the YWCA, the Women's Temperance Union, the Red Cross, and the DAR to work on war relief activities. Two things are credited with women being able to command respect and have their patriotism taken seriously during this era. One, these voluntary groups were highly organized, like the military, like men. And two, civilian women wore uniforms. The uniforms allowed women to look the part, so to speak, and be taken seriously. Many women saw their wartime service as a way to claim full citizenship, or at least a way to get closer to full citizenship. Remember, this is before women's suffrage. Women were not permitted to vote in this country until 1920. The DAR's 26th Continental Congress, which is the DAR's annual meeting, commenced only 10 days after the war was declared on April 6th. This woman, Sarah Mitchell Guernsey, was sworn in as President General of DAR. A natural-born leader, Mrs. Guernsey formed the DAR War Relief Service Committee during her first week in office. The committee was a DAR national committee formed to organize DAR's war relief efforts. And these are the members of the War Relief Service Committee on the national leadership level. For those of you who are familiar with our buildings, this was taken on the south portico of Memorial Continental Hall, which is the C Street side. And these are DAR members in Massachusetts, attending a meeting of the DAR's War Relief Service Committee for Red Cross work. The most prominent voice of the War Relief Service Committee was its director of publicity, Michigan State Regent Clara Hadley Waite. In addition to leading her own state, her service in this position greatly impacted all the DAR's volunteer service during the war. She's here in a newspaper portrait on the left, and in the image on the right, she's on the far right in her Navy League uniform. On behalf of the committee, Mrs. Waite issued 100,000 registration blanks to DAR members to survey the skills and services they could provide. The information from these forms helped catalog resources both for the National Society and for the United States government's war efforts. Mrs. Waite also wrote bulletins that were distributed to every chapter and read during chapter meetings. The bulletins were republished by newspapers around the country, and they were used by the U.S. government through the Committee of the Council of National Defense. Throughout the war, Mrs. Waite also compiled a record of the relief work the daughters had completed. With the war in full force, the U.S. government was not prepared for the costs involved and needed additional funding from its citizens to guarantee victory. The federal government estimated that the war was going to cost the country $30 billion. Chapters around the country gave up everything they thought was too frivolous during wartime. Gone were their social events and even the refreshments that they would have served during meetings. And all of these savings they turned back into their war effort activities. The War Relief Service Committee encouraged DAR members to help finance the war through the purchase of Liberty Loan war bonds. The DAR's largest financial contribution to war relief, both in terms of funds and in terms of national importance, was its donations to the 4 Liberty Loans and the final Victory Loan. According to the DAR's report of war work, DAR chapters spent more than $333,000 on bonds, and individual daughters spent more than $36.5 million. Besides buying bonds, the daughters also assisted in selling bonds to the public, raising approximately $52 million more that way. Funds were raised in many other ways as well. Members held benefit concerts, rummage sales, and other events. They also made and sold flags and donated unwanted precious metals to communal melting pots. Patriotic films such as Eagle's Wings, The Unbeliever, and America's Answer were presented by DAR chapters to their communities. Movie nights both encouraged patriotic fervor and provided members with additional funds to fund their war relief effort. The image on the left here is an invitation to a showing of Eagle's Wings here at DAR headquarters in 1917. The image on the right is an advertisement for a lecture on the needs of our soldiers by Clara Waite in Scottville, Michigan. DAR members registered as public speakers and addressed war rally meetings to raise additional funds and awareness of the needs of soldiers and the importance of purchasing war bonds. With all the money they raised, DAR members had sufficient resources to fund diverse projects. One of their most successful ventures was their knitting campaign. Weekly chapter meetings became knitting bees as they made socks, sweaters, hats, and gloves for American soldiers and sailors. Chapters near Army encampments created camp hospitality committees to provide much-needed care to the soldiers. Camp mothers mended clothing, cooked nourishing meals, and delivered small gifts. Chapter members taught classes and gave demonstrations on food conservation practices following the U.S. Food Administration's guidelines. DAR chapters' knitting circles were so efficient that the local Red Cross chapters asked the DAR to take complete charge of their knitting department. The daughters staffed their local Red Cross rooms, instructing beginners and making sure there was plenty of yarn available. This image shows DAR members knitting on behalf of the Red Cross. They're members of the Louisa St. Clair chapter, which is in Detroit. This is a photograph of Mending Day at Camp Custer, which is near Battle Creek, Michigan, was near Battle Creek, Michigan. DAR chapters also assembled comfort kit bags for soldiers, which could include a variety of toiletries and personal items. All gifts to soldiers were plainly marked with a card bearing the DAR insignia. And this is an example of one of those cards, and I've just used it because I think it's cute. It gives the information about the chapter and where the gift came from, and also the kind of jelly that was included in the gift box. They were canning, of course, as well, part of that food conservation. And these are members of the Letitia Green Stevenson DAR chapter in Illinois, knitting and mending garments for the Red Cross. DAR joined the American Commission for Relief in Belgium, which raised money throughout the world, purchased food, and arranged to ship it to Belgium. DAR chapter members sewed clothing and contributed to the Belgian Baby Milk Fund. In 1917, this medal was presented to DAR by the American Commission for Relief in Belgium in gratitude for DAR's contributions. The obverse depicts the heads of the King and Queen of Belgium, and the reverse features an allegorical image of liberty comforting the poor. It was produced by Tiffany & Company, and it belongs to the DAR Museum, who were gracious enough to loan it to us for our exhibit. DAR urged its members actually to raise money for Belgian relief even before the United States had entered the war. The DAR raised almost $150,000 by June 1916, almost a full year before the U.S. entered the war. These women are Belgian relief workers participating in an old clothing drive in Massachusetts. They're members of the Mercy Warren chapter in Massachusetts. The DAR responded to staggering needs in France in a number of ways, both during and after the war. They sponsored children through an organization called the Fatherless Children of France. The DAR sent donations to the organization, which in turn sent quarterly payments to the children's guardians. By the end of the war, more than 4,000 children had been sponsored by DAR. This is a photograph of a French orphan who was sponsored by the Canoe Place chapter in Pennsylvania. And the page on the right is a record of the chapter's wartime activities. This image is of two French orphans who were sponsored by the Faneuil Hall chapter in Massachusetts. By June 1918, the War Relief Service Committee learned of a plan the American Committee for Devastated France developed to re-chickenize France. The DAR responded with a bulletin proposing that daughters organize local campaigns to involve children in this particular relief effort. The goal of the fundraising campaign was to supply the French people with much-needed poultry farms to fill a gap in the food supply. A donation of 10 cents placed an egg in an incubator. 25 cents placed a chick on a farm. $400 established a poultry farm with 2 incubators, 1,000 eggs, and 1 wounded soldier to work as the poultryman for 1 year. To encourage donations, the DAR created this I Have a Chicken in France button pin, which was given for the 10 and 25 cent donations. During summer 1917, the daughter of the mayor of Tilloy, a small French village in northern France, reported on the destruction visited on her once beautiful hometown. Subsequently, the wife of the French ambassador contacted DAR leadership and introduced DAR to one of its largest and proudest achievements in war relief. This is what the Tilloy mayor's family home looked like in 1914. And this is what it looked like circa 1917, and the entire village went this way. The entire village was devastated by the war. The DAR pledged to rebuild the village in thanks to the French people for their aid during the American Revolution. After much discussion, planning, and a visit by President General Guernsey to Tilloy, the DAR decided to fund a complete water system for the village. A fitting and lasting gift from the daughters, the water system consisted of a well, a large reservoir, a windmill, fire hydrants, and 2 watering troughs for animals, one of which was also a decorative fountain. A dedication ceremony, attended by many DAR members and French nobles, was held on August 23, 1921, to dedicate the water system. President General Anne Miner said in her speech, "In presenting this gift from our society, I am expressing the love, the honor, the high regard in which France is held by every daughter of the American Revolution. These waterworks betoken the friendship, the gratitude, the love which our society bears to France today, and which our ancestors bore to Lafayette and to the France of long ago." And that is Mrs. Miner in this photograph there in the middle with her President General pin and sash prominent. She's standing between the French ambassador to the United States and his wife on the day of that dedication ceremony. Here, the image on the left is the Tilloy fountain site after the bombing, and the image on the right is of the decorative fountain, which is part of that water system that was donated by the DAR in 1921. Our exhibit, titled Women of Resilience, DAR in World War I, as I mentioned earlier, is across the hall in the Americana room. It's available to visitors weekdays, 8:30 to 4 o'clock. So again, anyone who'd like to join us over there after we're done here is more than welcome to do so. Featured are photographs, letters, bulletins, and scrapbooks from the NSDAR archives, as well as generous loans from the DAR Museum. The exhibit includes many, many more details than I was able to provide here today. Also, we have a small token for you. Staff members will be available in the exhibit space to offer you one of our poppy buttons. Unique to our department, it was designed by one of our historians. As we discovered, the image of the poppy used as a symbol in remembrance of World War I veterans, and that we're used to seeing mostly in Commonwealth nations' war commemorations, was actually designed by a woman who was not only an American, but also a DAR member. Her name was Moyna Michael, and she was inspired, of course, by John McCrae's poem In Flanders Fields. And there's a special area of the exhibit that's dedicated to Moyna. And lastly, before I take any questions, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the other staff members of the Historian General's DAR Department of Archives and History Office. The majority of the research and the installation of our beautiful and inspiring exhibition are due to their tireless efforts. Some of them are here and may also be willing to help me answer a few questions if I need their support. So anyone have any questions?